Okay, so I want to set up a new topic today, and to get us started, I thought we'd play a game. So the game is going to be called Cash in a Hat, and we'll see what this game is like in a minute. So the idea is this: there's going to be two players. I'm going to pick on two of you. I hope I can find people who've brought some money to class. All right, so player one will have a choice. Player one can put nothing, $1, or $3 into a hat. The hat will then be given to player two, and player two can look at what's in the hat, and either she can match what's in the hat, i.e. add the same amount in, so 1 if it's 1 or 3 if it's 3, or she can simply take the cash. All right, the payoffs of this game will be as follows. Player one, if they put nothing in, they're not going to get anything. If they put 1 in and it's matched, then they double their money, so they get 2 back. If they put 3 in and it's matched, then they double their money, so they get 6 back, they'll net 3. However, if they put 1 in and player 2 takes it, they've just lost their $1. And if they put $3 in and player 2 takes it, they've lost $3. Right, everyone understand that? Pretty simple. From player 2's point of view, if player 2 matches, then they get their investment back plus $1.50 if they matched 1, so they get $2.50 back in all. And they get their investment back plus $2 if they match 3, so that's if they get 5 back in all. And of course, if they simply take the money out of the hat and put it in their pocket, then that's what they get in the game. Right, so once again, if player 2 matches with $1, there's $1 in the hat and she matches, then she gets back $2.50 for a profit of $1.50. If there's $3 and she matches 3, she gets back 5 for a profit of 2. And if she simply takes the money out of the hat and puts it in her pocket, then she gets however much money was in the hat. All right, so I here will be the provider of the hat. We'll use the same hat we used before. And if necessary, I'll provide sheets of paper we can write IOUs on, but I'm hoping we can play for real cash. Later on, it could be nice to get a chair here, but for now, let me just go down here. And I'm going to grab this mic. Who here wants to be player one? Who brought some money to class today? I'm quite willing to pick on somebody. All right, good, good, good. So player one is, what's your name again?
Justin.
Justin. So hold on to that hat for a second, all right? And who wants to be player two? All right, so this gentleman here, whose name is?
Nate.
Nate, all right, so we have Justin and Nate. All right, so Justin, you have to decide how much money you're going to put in the hat. Did you bring some money too, Nate? Better make sure you have, otherwise borrow some from your neighbors.
All right, I'm going to put in $1.
All right. All right, so the money's been put in the hat and delivered to Nate.
And so I'm going to put in the $1 too, so that I get...
All right, so if we empty out the hat, here's our beautiful pink hat. I should really have the hat passed across the room rather than have me do it, but we have $2 in the hat. So I'm going to pay what am I going to pay? I'm going to pay player one $2. I'm going to give back their original $1 and give them 2 in a second. And I'm going to pay player two $1.50. You just hold the hat. We'll do that for
$2.50, right?
$2.50. Yes. Well, you got your money back. Trying to cheat you here.
Is that it?
All right. So player, I'll get you the rest in a second. Hang on a second, right? For now, and so double the money. All right. All right. All right. So this is one reason to take this class is if you play well, you get money. All right. Now let's just try again. All right. So we had one round of this. Let's have another round. Who wants to play player one now? All right. So Katie is player one. All right. Katie, you bring some money?
Yeah, sure.
All right. And who wants to be player two? Someone further away. Let's have Stephen, isn't it? Is that right? Yeah. So Stephen's going to be player two. Do you bring some cash?
I think so.
All right. All right. Otherwise, borrow it from your neighbors. I can have IOUs here. So here's the hat.
I've only got
Only
coins.
got coins? All right, all right.
Put it in a buck.
Okay, great. So pass the hat down. We'll see if it makes it there. Test the honesty of the class here. It's working its way down. I'm going to have to, there we go. Here we go. All the way down to Stephen.
Okay.
Check how much is in there.
There's $1 in here.
There's $1 in there, so you can decide whether to match or not.
Okay, I'll match it.
All right, so Stephen's going to match as well. All right, once again, we have this time, rather annoyingly, $1 and some coins in here, which I will empty on the stage to prove it to everybody. All right, and I will. All right, there are coins in here. Okay, so I'll match this in a second and give it back to you guys. All right, so everyone understand the game? All right, everyone understand how this game worked? So we're going to spend a while discussing this, and we'd go on playing, except I'd eventually lose so much money I'm going to run out of lunch money. The TAs would object. All right, so what I want to do is I want to analyze this game. I want to think about what this game's about, what's really going on here. All right, so first, this is just a little game involved putting some money in a hat, but I want to suggest to you that this is a toy version of a much more important game. This is a toy version of a game involving a lender and a borrower. So you could think of our player ones here. That was Katie on the second round, and is it Justin on the first round? Yeah. Justin on the first round. As imagine them working in an investment bank or perhaps in a venture capitalist firm, right? And what they're doing is they're giving a loan to somebody, some budding entrepreneur who's come up with a new project. So Stephen in round 2, and who was my budding entrepreneur in round 1? What was your name? Nate in round 1 have come up with some budding project. They've left Yale, perhaps after their junior year. They've left early because they've got some great idea for something which is going to make them millions. So either it's a new mousetrap or a new version of Facebook or something. And they go to that's half, isn't it? So something better than the new version of Facebook, right? And they go to this venture capitalist firm. Maybe it's some firm in New York, or maybe it's the Yale Investment Trust, whatever, and they explain this great idea to them, and they ask for some money to invest in this firm to buy machinery and to pay early wages and so on. Right? And the lender, the guy who works at the venture capitalist firm, has to decide how much money to invest in this project. Right? After this money has been invested in the project, the person who borrowed it faces choices. They could go forward with their project, work hard, spend the money on the things they're supposed to spend, or they could just disappear to Mexico. All right? All right? Go back to Yale, for that matter. All right? And there's actually something in between they could do, which is less dramatic than disappearing to Mexico. They could just not work particularly hard, shirk, perhaps join in someone else's project, and just let the money run down without the lender really knowing about it. All right? So this is a very real problem that some of you, some of the budding entrepreneurs in the room, are going to face when you leave Yale, and more of you who are going to end up working for investment banks, perhaps unfortunately, are going to face as well. All right? Okay, so we're going to spend the whole of today analyzing this, but before we even start, let's notice that there's something different about this game, other than its sheer triviality. There's something different about this game than games we've played all the way up to the midterm so far. What's different about this game? What's different? Yeah, can I get a mic in here? Sorry. Yes, what's different?
The moves aren't simultaneous.
The moves are not simultaneous. This is a sequential move game. Let me put the rules up here and bring this down. So for the first time, we're looking at a sequential move game. And we're going to spend most of the rest of the term looking at sequential move games, or at least looking at games that involve sequential elements. Now what makes this a sequential move game? Let's be careful about this. What makes it a sequential move game is not simply that player 1 moved first and player 2 moved second, although that's true. What really made this a sequential move game is that player 2 knew what player 1 had done before he got to make his move. Right? It isn't the timing per se that matters. It's going to turn out it's the fact that player 2 could observe player 1's choice before having to make his or her choice that matters. And notice, just while we're on the subject, more than that, player 1 knew this was going to be the case. All right, so let's just get that down. So in this game, player 2 knows player 1's choice before she chooses. She being player 2. Let's say before 2 chooses. All right? And second, player 1 knows that this will be the case. And the way we dramatized this just now is player 1 put the money in the hat was transported across the classroom with people very honestly not stealing the money to player 2. Player 2 could look in the hat, could see how much money was in there before Stephen or Nate had to make their choice. Is that right? All right. So how do we go about analyzing games that have this sequential structure? So it turns out that a useful way to analyze them, and a way I want to get us used to today already, is to draw a tree. So in the first half of the class we drew a lot of matrices. Now we're going to draw trees. And for those people who haven't seen trees before, it's not a big deal. It's an object that looks like a tree. That's why it's called a tree. All right, so let's have a look. So in this particular game, here is player 1 making her choice. And in fact, she has 3 possible choices. She can put nothing, 1, or 3 into the hat. All right? Player 2 then chooses, although really player 2 only has choices to make if there's some money in the hat. And player 2 has 2 choices in this particular game in either case. Either player 2 is going to add $1 or $3 into the hat, or they're going to disappear off to Mexico, taking our investors' lunch money with them. All right? And let's put down the payoffs, and let's put down as payoffs the net gains they make. All right? So if nothing goes in, no one makes any money, so 0, 0 will be the payoff. If 1 is matched by 1, then the investor, the lender, doubles her money, so she makes a net profit of 1. If the money is taken out by player 2, then she loses 1. Right, down here, if 2 matches her investment of 3, she doubles her money again, so she makes a net profit of 3. And if the money is taken out, she loses 3. Everyone all right with that? Let's do player 2's payoffs. In the case in which he matches 1, he makes a net profit of 150. In the case in which he just steals the 1, he makes a net profit of 1. And down here, in the case where he matches 3, he makes a net profit of 2. He gets 5 back that he'd invested 3 to start with. And here, if he just takes the money out, he makes a profit of 3. All right? So this game is just illustrated on the board. And for some of you, this is the first time you've seen a tree, but I'm going to claim it isn't such a complicated object. And we could spend a lot of time analyzing this in terms of connected graphs and so on, but it isn't really worth it. It's just a tree. All right? OK, so let's just make sure we understand that the payoffs here represent player 1's payoff and player 2's payoff, respectively. All right. So how do we analyze what to do in these games? It's a good idea always to write up the tree, like it's a good idea to write up the matrix. But how to analyze what we should do? Well, before we do that, let me just grab the mic and find out from our players what they should do. All right? All right, so where was my first investor? All right. So, Justin, why did you put $1 in there?
Well, if I put $1 in, he has an incentive to put $1 in too. If I put in $3, he's just going to take the money and run.
All right, OK, so what's Justin doing? Justin is looking forward, if you like. He's putting himself in player 2's shoes. This was, who was our receiver? Nate's shoes, and anticipating what Nate's going to do. And as Justin said, if he puts in 3, Nate's going to have an incentive to take the money and run. In fact, what would Nate have done? If 3 had been in the hat, what would you have done?
I like Justin, but I would have taken the money.
All right. Even though you know Justin, you'd have taken the money and disappeared somewhere. We don't quite know, right? Is the same true for the other pair? So Katie, you also put 1 in. Is that your explanation as well?
Same reasoning.
Same reasoning. OK, so everyone figured out what was going on. And once again, we think probably, let's try, Stephen, if there'd been $3 in the hat, what would you have done?
I would have taken it.
We've taken it. All right. So we're basically getting what's predicted here out of the game. All right. And let's just see that more formally, that idea. So the idea here is that the players who move early on in the game should do something we've always talked about before. They should put themselves in the shoes of the other players. But here, that takes the form of anticipation. Right? They're anticipating what players down the tree are going to do. Right? So the key idea here is anticipation. All right? What they're going to do is they're going to look forward down the tree imagine themselves in the shoes of the later players, look at the incentives facing those later players, imagine that they do the best they can, those later players do the best they can, and then work backwards through the tree. So the key idea here is to look forward to the end of the tree and work back. Look forward and work back. All right, and that's exactly the process that Katie and Justin describe themselves as doing. All right. All right. Now in this tree, let's have a go at this. So let's imagine ourselves in Stephen or Nate's shoes, having found, as they did in fact, having found $1 in the hat. They then are making a choice between adding $1, which nets them $1.50, or taking the dollar, which nets them 1. 150 is bigger than 1, so we think they're going to go this way. All right, everyone happy with that? Conversely, if they found themselves with $3 in the hat, then if they add $3, they match, they're going to get $2. They're going to net $2. And if they take the money out, they're going to get away with $3. All right, 3 seems bigger than 2, so we think they're going to go this way. All right, again, we're assuming that these are their real payoffs. Okay, so from player 1's point of view, since player 1 knows that player 2 will observe the choice before making her own choice, and since player 1 can put him or herself in player 2's shoes and anticipate this choice, player 1 is essentially choosing between what? If she puts in 0, she gets 0. If she puts in 1, she knows 2 will match, and she'll double her money and get 1. And if she puts in 3, then she knows player 2 will take the money and run, in which case our lender will have lost $3. So she's choosing between 0, 1, and -3, and she's going to choose 1. Right, which is exactly what happened in the game. All right, everyone happy with how we did that? Right? So this idea of starting at the last player, the player who moves last, solving out what they're going to do, and then working our way back through the tree has a name. The name for this is backward induction. And I apologize for the business school students in the room who've had this hammered into them too many times already, so I apologize for them in advance. All right, backward induction. Now it turns out there's precisely one controversial thing about backward induction, which is whether you should say backward induction or backwards induction. So I'm going to leave the S off and call it backward induction, but it's up to you which you think the correct English is. All right? Okay. So since we've got this game here, let's talk about it a bit, this idea of the lender and the borrower. It's not an unimportant situation. We've simplified it down to a very simple choice here, but it's a very basic choice out there in the real world. All right? And it's an important choice. After all, what keeps the economy running is the ability of lenders to lend money to businesses that then invest them profitably and are able to make returns. So this underlies a whole bunch of stuff going on in the economy. All right? So let's talk about this. And the first thing I want to talk about is I want to point out that there's a problem here. There's a bad thing here, much like there was a bad thing in the very first class of the semester. In the very first class of the semester, the bad thing was a prisoner's dilemma. All right, but here it's a little different, and let's focus on it a while. So the bad thing is we ended up here. Not a disaster. All right, the lender doubled her money. The borrower was able to go ahead with the project on a small scale and make some money. The bad thing, however, is that we would have liked to end up here. All right? Had we been able to have a large project funded with $3 and had the borrower repaid those dollars, so matched in effort or whatever it happens to be, then we'd ended up at an outcome that is better not just for the lender, it's obviously better for the lender, but it's also better for the borrower. Everyone see that? Right? So the outcome we'd like to have reached gets the lender 3, whereas she's only getting 1 where we ended up, and it gets the borrower 2, where he's only getting 150, where we actually ended up. All right? Why is it that we were unable, so both of our pairs, both Justin and Nate, and Katie and Stephen, why were we unable to get to here? Why were we unable to get to here? Any takers? What got us? What prevents us from getting to this good outcome? Let's go back to Katie a second and see if we can. Yeah, you go ahead. Oh, I'll come. It's all right. All right. So Katie was saying why she invested 1. I picked on Justin before. So here's this good outcome. It's better for you. It's better for Stephen, who's your borrower. Why aren't we getting to this 3-2 outcome?
Because if I play 3, him matching my money is dominated.
All right.
Strictly dominated.
All right. So the problem here is Katie would like to invest 3 if she knew that in fact Stephen was going to match, but she knows Stephen's not going to match. Right? Stephen, in fact, is going to run off with the cash. All right? It's going to end up being spent at Starbucks or something. All right? And from Stephen's point of view, he would actually like to be able to borrow the $3. He would like to be able to end up at this 3-2 outcome as well. The problem is he knows, and he knows that Katie knows, and Katie knows that he knows that in fact he's going to run off with the cash. Is that right? Is that right? All right, so we're in a bit of a problem here. We'd like to get this good outcome, but incentives are preventing us from getting there. What do we call this kind of situation? What do we call this kind of problem? Anybody? No takers? All right, this is called moral hazard. This is called moral hazard. How many of you have heard the term moral hazard before? All right, a number of people have heard it. So here we are, moral hazard. Here is the problem that the agent, in this case the borrower, has incentives, will have incentives to do things that are not in the interests of the principal. All right? If we're not careful, and for example, by giving too big a loan, the incentives of the borrower will be such that they will actually not be aligned with the incentives of the lender, and that will prove to be bad for the lender. But notice the existence of this moral hazard problem isn't only bad for the lender, it ends up being bad for the borrower as well. All right, let me give you another example. In insurance, there's a classic, probably the classic moral hazard problem. If an insurance company insures me against having my car stolen, there's a moral hazard problem in that I might, if the car is fully insured, I might now have the incentive not to bother to lock my car or to leave it anywhere on the street in New Haven. All right? All right? Because I'm not bearing the cost anymore. All right? So we need to be able to, the insurance company needs to worry about that in writing an insurance contract for me. And in practice, what the insurance company does is it forces me to take a deductible. It doesn't allow me full insurance. It makes sure that some of the cost of having a car stolen is going to fall on me. That's bad for me, by the way, because it means I can't get full insurance. All right? And notice that what happened here is rather similar. In this case, both the lender and the borrower would rather have a big project, a big loan, and have the agent pay back that loan. They'd prefer this 3-2 outcome. But they can't get there, and therefore, rather than having a full-scale project, Katie or Justin only offered the borrowers a small-scale project. All right? So the idea here, in this example, was, what happened was we kept the size of the project, or the size of the loan. You could think of this as the project if they're borrowing something. Small to reduce the temptation to cheat. Okay, to reduce that temptation not to repay the loan. All right. So these problems are all over all over society, but they're particularly prevalent in situations involving lenders and borrowers. All right. So a good question is, how might we solve this problem? A lot of you are about to go out and try and borrow money to set up your projects, to run your new version of Facebook, whatever. And a lot more of you, as we said before, are going to end up loaning money, perhaps someone else's money, probably, at least for a while. And we want to know how you might solve this moral hazard problem. We've seen one way to solve it. One way is simply to keep the size of the project small. What else could we do? Let me come down and try and have a bit of a discussion. What else could we do? So Stephen, what else could we do? You're with a borrower. What else could you do?
Like impose laws.
We could impose laws, okay. So we could impose laws, much like we talked about in Prisoner's Dilemma. We could regulate this market. There's going to be a little bit of a problem we're going to run into in regulating the law, in using the law here. What's the problem we're going to run into here? Well, I mean, we do have laws that regulate borrowers and lenders. What's the law that regulates borrowers and lenders? So bankruptcy law, right? So we have law that regulates to some extent what lenders and borrowers can do. One of the things we do in that law is we limit the degree to which we're allowed to punish the borrowers. Right? So bankruptcy law pretty much says we're going to put some limit on how much Katie can inflict pain on Stephen for running off with the lunch money. Right? Stephen can simply say, I can't repay, I'm bankrupt, and he's more or less allowed to get a fresh start. So the law would be good here, but there's limits to what we can do. Right? We could go back to the Dickensian world of throwing Stephen in jail for not repaying the loan, but it's tough. There are downsides to that, it turns out. All right. So what else could we do? Yeah, I'm going to have to dive in there a little bit. So shout into the mic.
The venture capitalist can impose restrictions on what the person can do with the money.
All right. So he could try and say there's only certain things you can do with the money. And for example, to make that credible, what he might have to do is to say, show me what you're going to do with the money. Show me the receipts. Right? Another thing you could say is, I will only give you the money if you show me exactly how you're going to spend this. Right? That's a good solution. Notice that you could regard that as changing the order of play. Right? It's a little bit like saying, let's have the borrower have to move first. Let's have the borrower have to commit what their actions are going to be, how they're going to spend the money before, and show the contracts before the lender lends them the money. Right? And that's a good solution, but again, there are limitations to this solution. What are the limitations to that solution in the real world? Let's go back to all of you who are thinking about making millions with your new Facebook. What are the limitations to having some contract with the bank, with Chase, saying exactly how you're going to, not only saying exactly how you're going to spend the money, but actually detailing it already with contracts ahead of time? What are the problems with that? Someone else? Someone's thinking of going into business here? Let me pick on somebody a second. So what's your name, sir?
Kelly.
Kelly. So imagine you have some project. You're going to borrow some money from Chase or Mr. Swenson to set up this fund. Why might you worry about having everything written out and contractually ahead of time?
I mean, then it restricts your freedom on what your ideas are, I guess.
Right, so one problem is just sheer lack of flexibility, all right? If in fact the entrepreneur is not going to be flexible in how they actually run the project, there's not much point of being an entrepreneur in the first place, right? There's a limit, to how much control you want to give to the lender. The lender doesn't really want to run the project for you, right? There's also simply a problem of timing. It's simply not going to be possible to specify all the expenditures of a project up front. You're going to need some money to do some things ahead of time. All right? So it's a good idea. Changing the order of play is a good idea, but there's going to be limitations to this. What else could you do as the lender? What else could you do? Thinking of loaning some money in here. Loaning some money to one of your classmates for some project. Let's try again.
Something like loan money over time in stages and observe progress.
Good. So one possibility is to break the loan up and give it, let it come in small installments. If you do well on the first installment, I'll give you a bigger installment next time. All right? And notice that that's a little bit like something we talked about the very first week. It's a little bit like taking this one-shot game and turning it into a repeated game. Right? It's turning a one-shot interaction into a repeated interaction. And we'll come back and talk about repeated interactions later on in the course. Again, notice that there might be some limitations to this. I mean, I think it's a good idea, and in general you should be trying to do this, but it could just be that for Nate to set up his new Facebook and for Stephen to set up his new mousetrap factory, they just need a chunk of money at the beginning. There may be some limit to how little money you can give them at the beginning, since they have to hire workers and set up the factory and make some big splash in advertising and so on and so forth. All right, so again, it's a good idea, but there may be limitations here. What else could you do? Let's have a look at the numbers on the board. Right now, the numbers on the board say that if Stephen's mousetrap project, were you the Facebook or the, if Stephen's mousetrap project goes well, and it ends up being a big project with lots of money available, there are 5 units of money available in profit, right? 3 plus 2, right? And the way we've designed things so far, our lender, I gave you these payoffs in the game, the lender is going to double her money. She's going to get 6 back to net 3, and Stephen's going to get 2. So the division of that 5 is 3 and 2. But we don't have to divide the money like that. If you're a lender, you may want to think about how you divide up the spoils of a successful project. All right? So how else could you divide up those $5, that 3 plus 2, in a way that might be better for everybody? Nate?
Give the investor $3.01 if they do that other choice, and then take a little bit of a hit, but that way you'll still have something that's Pareto optimal to the other choice that we came to before.
All right, I'm guessing people didn't hear that, but that was right, so just say it. That's exactly right. So what you could do here is you could redesign the payoffs of this project in the event that it's successful. All right, what you could do is take these 5 units of profit, and instead of having 3.2, let's write in a different color, we could give the borrower, the entrepreneur, 3.1, leaving 1.9 to the lender. All right, so we could change the payoffs of this contract to be 1.9, 3.1 in the event of a big project. Why does that help? Because now our borrower, Nate or Stephen, were they to end up with a hat with $3 in it, they now will find it's in their interest to match the $3 and get 3.1 rather than 3. All right? All right? So what's this an example of? This idea of changing the contract to give the borrower incentives to repay, incentives not to shirk, incentives not to disappear with the cash, is an example of what's called incentive design. All right. So the idea here is in a lot of businesses, incentives are not given by God, they're designed by the people who write the contract. All right? And if you're either the borrower or the lender, you should be thinking about writing a contract that's going to achieve the end that you want. Now notice in this particular example, exactly as Nate said, the lender is going to take a bit of a hit here. They're not going to get 100% return, but they're ending up doing better than they would have done by giving a small loan. All right? They've ended up getting 1.9 rather than 1. Right? They're getting 1.9 rather than 1. So in this particular example, it won't always be the case, but in this example, they're taking a smaller share of a larger pie. And sometimes a smaller share of a larger pie is bigger than a larger share of a smaller pie. Not always, but sometimes. Right? The reason the pie is larger is we're able now, in an incentive-compatible way, we're able to go ahead and have a large project. So in this example, the smaller share of the larger pie actually ended up being bigger than the larger share of the smaller pie. So a smaller share of a larger pie can be bigger than a large share of a small pie. Not always, of course. All right, this is just an example. All right. Now let's just be a little bit careful here. All right, so in this particular example, even though this 1.9, this return that our lender is able to make by accepting a smaller share of a larger pie, even though it's a bigger absolute return, it's smaller in another sense. In what sense is it smaller? Let's be careful here. So we're tempted to say, look, it's 1.9. 1.9 is bigger than 1. That's got to be a good thing. But since some of you actually are going to go out into investment banks, and you might be posed this question, let me just make sure we don't make a blunder that's going to spoil your interview. So what might you be worried about as an investment banker about this deal, about this contract? Somebody else? Anybody else? I'll come down again. That's all right. What might you be worried about? Who here's be honest? Who here has been interviewing with either investment banks or venture capital firms or private equity firms? Raise your hands. Oh, come on, it's going to be more than that. All right, all right. There was a hand. Where was the hand at the back? There was a hand way back here. No? Yeah? So what might be wrong with this project from your point of view? Actually, can I get the mic on that side? This gentleman here. What might be wrong with the project from your point of view?
If you could actually just find 3 small projects, then you could still get 100% returns just by dividing it up.
Good, good. You're going to make lots of money for Morgan Stanley or whatever it is. Good, good. Your name is Brian, right? So there's a good ad to hire Brian at Morgan Stanley. All right, all right. So what Brian said was, it's true that you're making a bigger absolute return here. This is a bigger absolute return, but this return up here is 100% return on your capital. The rate of return on capital is higher making 100% return on an investment of 1 than making a 1.9 return on an investment of 3. The rate of return is better in the smaller case. So which is the right answer? Should we worry about the rate of return, the 100% rate of return, or should we worry about the absolute return? If you're in the business of investment banking, who thinks you should worry about the absolute return? Who thinks you should worry about the rate of return? Who thinks it depends? What does it depend on? What does it depend on? Yes, keep me from falling off this thing. What does it depend on? Someone who said it depends, what does it depend on? Depends is only a good compromise vote if you know what it depends on. Yeah, the gentleman here.
Since an investment banking firm only has a limited amount of money to invest, you want to see if you can get a higher rate of return investing elsewhere. All right, so I think you're on the right lines. There's 2 things to worry about. One is, what is your supply of funds to invest? And the other is, what's the other supply you're worried about as an investment bank or a venture capitalist firm or a private equity investor? What's the other supply coming your way? Yeah, the number of projects coming across your door, if you like, the demand for your cash, the supply of projects. All right? All right, so what we have to worry about here is what is the true opportunity cost of that money? Right? If there are very few projects out there, all right, then you basically just want to go down the list of projects picking off absolute return. However, to go to the other extreme, if there's an infinite supply of projects all coming in, all of which will offer 100% return, then as our banker at the back told us, you should just go for 3 small projects rather than 1 large one. Right? But the question of which is better, it isn't as simple as saying, yes, we should always go for 3 small projects. There may not be 3 small projects out there that offer 100% return. All right, so what's going to matter here is what's the true opportunity cost of the capital, and that's going to depend on what projects are available to you. All right, this was just an example of incentive design. Just one example of incentive design. Let's talk about other examples of incentive design. Incentive design's been a lot in the news lately. Who else tends to have incentive contracts other than borrowers? Who else out there tends to have incentive contracts? It's a big topic in the news these days. So who has incentives written into their contracts? Yeah, way over here. Let me run over at the risk of blurring the camera. All right. So who else has incentives in their contracts?
Managers.
Managers. All right. So CEOs have huge incentive clauses in their contracts. All right. Sometimes in the form of options. All right. Why do they have those incentive clauses in their contract? Well, there's 2 interpretations of this. One interpretation is it's just a bad thing and they're just trying to screw the world. But there's a more moderate view of this. The more moderate view of this is that those incentive clauses in their contracts are attempts to align the interest of the managers with the interest of the shareholders, just as this contract is attempting to align the interest of the lender and the interest of the borrower. All right? So by managers, I took you to mean CEO, but what other kind of managers recently in the press, very recently, this weekend, have been talking about incentive contracts? Somebody way over there. I'm going to be caught on the wrong side as usual. Yeah, can I squeeze through? I'll try and squeeze through. Can I squeeze through? Sorry. All right, sorry. There we go. Where was it? Where was my answer to that question? Here we go.
Managers of baseball teams.
All right, so managers of sports teams also have incentive contracts these days, right? Incentives to achieve certain levels. All right? Here it's not quite clear to me exactly what's going on. Right? We call those incentive contracts, but you might want to worry a little bit. I mean, do we really think that the manager has an incentive to lose otherwise? All right? So part of what's going on with incentive contracts isn't actually incentive contracts. Part of it is about sharing the risk. Right? And particularly in the kind of contracts that have been written about over the weekend with Joe Torre's contract for the Yankees, which he turned down, is partly perhaps to give him incentives to try and win, but perhaps is more to do with sharing the risk among the general manager and the manager of the team if they don't make it to the playoffs. But all right, they're still incentive contracts. Now we see incentive contracts elsewhere, and we've seen them since the Middle Ages. Right? So in the Middle Ages, incentive contracts took a particular form, and the form was called, well, two things: piece rates. Let's put it up here. Piece rates. And in agriculture, it took the form of sharecropping. What are piece rates? Somebody, what are piece rates? What are piece rates? Anyone know anyone who's on piece rates? What is sharecropping? Somebody must be from a farming state. Yeah, there's somebody out here. The guy in orange out here, yeah.
Sharecropping is where the landowner takes a portion of the farmer's crop at the end of the farming season.
All right, so sharecropping is a contract whereby part of the output of the farm goes to the landowner and part is kept by the farmer. All right, going back to the Middle Ages, part of the output would stay with the peasant and part of it would go to the lord of the manor. Right? Piece rates are a similar idea. Rather than paying wages to workers, just bundles of cash, the amount at which they're paid depends on output. So piece rates would say if you produce 17 yards of cloth, then you'll get paid the revenue that's derived from 3 of them, say. All right? Both of these forms of contracting are there partly to create incentives. They create incentives because they create the incentive for the farmer to increase yields, and they create incentives for the part of the worker to increase output. All right, so piece rates are a big part of the story. All right. Incentive design is a pretty big topic, and we don't really have time to go into it much in this course, but it's worth mentioning that, in fact, the Nobel Prize that was won last week by those 3 economists we talked about was partly about incentive design. All right, so it's regarded as an important enough topic for the design of incentives across society as a whole to have been worthy of winning the Nobel Prize. And my guess is there's another Nobel Prize that's going to come out in this same area in the next 5 or 10 years. All right? Just to make it clear, you can have problems. You can write incentives badly. It's a classic story that you've all heard of, I'm sure, that often in the provision of public goods, let's say bridges or highways or tunnels, the incentives for the construction companies tend to be rather badly written. They're meant to have incentive clauses, but they never seem to quite get them right. It's easy to get these incentives wrong. And just to prove this doesn't just happen to management, let me just tell a story against myself. So a year and a bit ago, I was picking fruit with my then 3-year-old daughter, and I wanted to make sure that we got some fruit home to eat for dinner, and she didn't just eat all the fruit as we picked it. These were raspberries. So I decided to have a rule that sounds efficient. I said, well, any item of fruit that gets picked that's in good condition, we'll take it home for dinner, but if it's squashed, then we'll eat it then and there while we're picking the fruit. All right, so my 3-year-old proceeded to go along the bushes of raspberries, picking the raspberry, turning around to me and saying, squashed, and putting it in her mouth. All right? All right, squashed, squashed, squashed. Right? Which shows that a 3-year-old knows more than a professor about moral hazard or something like that. All right. All right. So one thing we can do is worry about incentive design in the design of the contract. There's another thing we can do here. What's the other thing we can do here? We're missing out something very basic. What is it that our borrower, Stephen and Nate, can do? Or put it more generally, for all of you, if you go out and start a company and you borrow some money to start your company when you leave Yale, what are you going to have to do? What's the borrower, what's the lender, what's the bank going to insist on? What's they going to insist on? Anybody? They're going to insist on collateral. They're going to insist on collateral. What is collateral? I'm somewhat charmed to see how few of you are going to end up borrowing money, but for those of you who haven't got trust funds, you're going to end up borrowing money. So what is collateral? Yes, what's collateral?
You give someone the whole, you let the bank hold on to something?
Right, you let the bank hold on to something in the event that you default on the loan. All right? You're going to let the bank hold on to something in the event that you default on the loan. Now, for most people here, what are they going to post as collateral? Let's assume that we're back to our original contract here. We can't do this. We're back to our original case. What are most of you going to end up using as collateral if you borrow money? Yeah, everyone's saying a house. I'm guessing that for most of you, I'm not going to look around the room because I don't know how many trust fund babies I've got in the room, but for most of you, it's going to be what? It's going to be your parents' house. All right? All right? So why is it that your parents' house being posted as collateral is going to prevent you from disappearing to Mexico with the loan? Well, let's have a look at how that changes the payoffs. Now, if you take the money and run, you disappear to Mexico, but you end up with $1 minus a house here and $3 minus a house there. Of course, we're relying here on you liking your parents enough not to mind about the fact they'll be sleeping in the rain, but as long as that's the case, with I think with high probability, you're now going to decide to return the loan, at least if you can. Is that right? Now notice that the way in which this collateral worked, there's a subtlety to how this collateral works. You might think that the way in which collateral works is that now the lender feels safer because even if you end up defaulting on the loan, at least they get this house. All right? And that's true. There's some truth in that. But that's really not the key here. Right? Frankly, most bank lenders don't want your parents' house. Right? I mean, your parents might have very nice houses, but this isn't a good housing market right now, and they don't particularly want to see your parents on the street. The way in which this works is not so much that it gives an extra positive return to the lender. The way in which it works is it gives an extra negative return to the borrower. All right, so let's just do this backward induction again with the house in place. All right, so with this house in place, as before, you'll return the loan up here. But now, provided you like your parents enough, you would also return the loan here, because you'll prefer $2 to $3 minus your parents' house, in which case you'll get a loan of 3. All right? So the way in which the collateral worked was by hurting you enough, or in this case hurting your parents enough, in the event of default, in such a way as to change your behavior. But notice it helped you. So here's a subtlety coming in here. By issuing collateral, we actually lowered the payoff of the borrower at certain endpoints of the tree. We lowered the payoff of the borrower at certain endpoints of the tree. But as a consequence, we were able to end up at an outcome that was better for the borrower. Sometimes having lower payoffs can actually make you better off. And the reason it makes you better off is it changes the behavior of other players in the game in such a way as may benefit you. In this example, by inducing the lender to give you a bigger loan. All right, so the way the collateral works is it lowers your payoffs if you do not repay, but it leads to you being better off. And the reason it makes you better off is it changes the choices of others, in a way in a way that helps you. All right, we're going to see lots of examples of that in the next couple of days. All right. Now, collateral is an example. We talked about incentive design. Collateral is also an example of something larger. The larger thing is the idea of commitment. Collateral is a commitment strategy. It's a commitment strategy. It commits you to repaying the loan. All right. I want to give another example of a commitment strategy. Right? I think this idea of commitment is an important one, and we have just about time to do it. So I wanted to go completely away from the context of our lender-borrower game a second and look somewhere else entirely. All right, so we get rid of this for now. I want to take us back to 1066. What happened in 1066? What happened in 1066? I know this is America and no one gets an education anymore, but still, what happened in 1066? The Norman conquest took place in 1066, right? So the Norman army invades from Normandy, led by William the Conqueror, and lands on the Sussex beaches at Hastings. All right? And what I want to imagine is a game involving the Norman army, or William the Conqueror in particular, and the Saxon army. All right? So here's the little game. So we're now in the area of medieval military strategy. All right? And here is the game. We'll start with the Saxons here. The Normans have already invaded, so I guess the Normans have already moved. But here's the Saxon army making a decision. They're deciding between fighting and the important medieval military tactic known as running away. And of course, the Normans are going to know whether the Saxons are actually going to charge down the beach and attack them, and they are going to have to decide whether to fight or run away. All right? And let's put the payoffs in. Now leave some space below here. Leave some space down here on your notes. All right? Let's put the payoffs in. So I'm going to put the Norman payoffs first and the Saxon payoffs second. Okay? Norman payoffs first, Saxon payoffs second. All right? So the payoffs are going to be like this. If both sides fight, a lot of people end up dead, and we'll call that 0-0. If the Saxons fight and the Normans run away, the Saxons get 2 and the Normans get 1, because at least they're alive. If the Saxons run away and the Normans fight, then the Normans get 2 and the Saxons get 1. It just flips things around. And if both lots run away, then ultimately it's good for the Saxons. All right? So this is the game. All right, let's be careful. I've put the Saxon payoff second. Put the Saxon payoff second. If we analyze this game by backward induction, we can see that the Normans are in trouble. Why are the Normans in trouble? Because if they are attacked by the Saxons, then fighting yields 0 and running away yields 1, so they're going to run away. And conversely, if the Saxons run away, then in fact the Normans will stay and fight, because it's easy to stay and fight against people who are running away. Even I can do that. All right? So so they're going to go for 2 rather than 1. But now the Saxons face this choice. They know that if they attack the Normans will run away and the Saxons will get 2. But if the Saxons run away, then the Normans will stay and fight, and the Saxons will only get 1. So the Saxons are going to end up fighting. All right? Everyone see how we did the backward induction? So this is not a good situation if you happen to be the Norman commander, if you're the guy who led these troops across the Channel. All right? So what did William the Conqueror do? He burnt his ships, all right? So let's now make this game a bit more like the real historical situation. Here's a move that William the Conqueror, the king of the Normans, can do. He can either not burn his ships, or he can burn them. If he burns them, then the game is rather different. Once again, the Saxons can decide whether to fight or run away, but now the Normans really don't have any choice. They have to stay and fight, because swimming back to France wearing armor is difficult. All right, so the payoffs become 0, 0, and 2, 1 as before. All right, so we know now that the Normans are going to stay and fight. That's all that's available to them. I've put it that they don't even have the option of running away. If you want, you could put running away yields them minus infinity or whatever it is to get drowned. All right? So now, if the Saxons, if the Normans have burnt the boats, the Saxons know that if they fight, the Saxons will get 0. If they run away, they'll get -1. So now they'll run away. And then from William the Conqueror's point of view, what's he choosing between? He knows that if he doesn't burn his boats, the Saxons will fight and his troops will run away. But if he does burn his boats, the Saxons will run away and his troops will fight, so he wants to burn his boats. All right, everyone okay with the example? All right. Now this is probably the classic example of a commitment strategy. Right? William the Conqueror in this example, or Cortez in perhaps the more famous example, burn the boats to get rid of some strategies, to get rid of some choices altogether. And you might think, how can getting rid of choices make me better off? And the reason in a game, particularly in a sequential game, but in the game generally, the reason getting rid of choices can make me better off is it changes the behavior of people on the other side of the game in such a way as benefits me. In this particular example, it makes the other side less likely to fight. All right? So once again, this is a commitment. It's a commitment, and the way it works is, this example of a commitment is actually to have fewer options. To have fewer options, and it changes the behavior of others. If it didn't change the behavior of others, it wouldn't be worth doing. All right.